We are aware of the nature of the mind to the extent that we examine ourselves and we know ourselves as I, which implicitly produces the effect of everything else being that. We are aware of the experiences that we have through the six sensory fields, through the list-making capacity of the intellect, which is highly selective. We have our storehouse memory. And we have mind essence, all of which operate at both a relative and an absolute level. Relative being the individual perceiver. It are these dynamics of these fibers of the world that hold us in place as we come to 13 of 25 and begin to incarnate. And we finally come up the ladder of phylogeny far enough, the human form, which is right now the main form on Earth that has structural architecture from the Earth to the Om point. In other words, it's hardwired. You don't have to create it, you don't have to invent it, you don't have to think about it, it's already there. All you have to do is realize it. But that's a big step, from our personal world and our personal ego, and we're so caught up with everything that we think, and our ego's up, our ego's down, and we take it all so personally. Meanwhile, this incredible force of the glory is wheeling upon you personally. And the perfection of this one little cell of the ocean and its perfect record of storehouse impressions and how it's expressing itself at that moment. It's an important note. I was talking with somebody during the break and about the storehouse of conditioning impressions, sanskaras, which is where we get to change our condition, change our case, uplift ourselves out of the coarse mud and refine our being, improve our condition. And I want to make a very clear idea that this pool of samskaras with which we select, which we are driven by the winds of karma, because we're attached to the wheel. Why are we attached to the wheel? Because we believe in an I. We believe the ego exists. And we believe that the I can be brought to an enlightened condition, and thus, no matter what we think we can think our way through, we can improve, and we can rise up the ladder, and we can pile up on top and climb up over everybody and stomp everybody down, and our ego will be on top, and somehow that will bring us happiness. But no matter what you do, if you do that, you're tied to the wheel. And that's the catch. Nobody gets that, because it does happen. You do claw your way to the top. I'm on top. Everybody's below me. Problem is, still tied to the wheel, and like, oh yeah, I'm up. I'm on top. And that's the rude awakening. What has been understood by the masters of consciousness is that the belief in the ego is the binding force to the wheel. And that even if it does bring a quality of temporary happiness or temporary victory, the force of the wheel will always rule. And that condition will be fleeting. And you'll be dragged back down to exactly 180 opposite, and you'll be all of the afflictions that you generated on the way up will afflict you again. That you generate on the way up will afflict you in return on the way down. That's the nature of production. This is where this idea of cessation comes in. The idea of cessation is essentially the starvation of the ego. It's a systematic idea, and it begins with the source of grace, Shaktipat, where, what am I saying when I'm saying the grace begins to reset and it begins to generate cessation? In other words, it starts to unravel the samskaric forces and conditioning forces. It is this content that on one side is a saving grace from the brutality of the force of the wheel at the brute level of nature and cause and effect, which is totally pure. It's, if you watch nature and you watch the nature channel and you watch animals get born, you watch them get slaughtered mercilessly, there's no hard feelings. It's so pure. We project all this stuff onto it, but it's really quite amazing. But because we have this capacity for reason, this extra capacity, we seek to mitigate that situation, as we should. But it is this binding quality to the wheel that is the problem, and that is the essence of the ego. And the belief that the ego can bring happiness, even if it does bring victory and happiness. Even the gods are come to a fall because they, having reached an exalted situation, even though their concept of existence is an inconceivable amount of time, it's still relative. So thus we get to this idea of cessation. The idea is the cessation, to put it simply, is the systematic slowing and ultimate stopping of the mind. Because look at the content of the ego. What is its basis? The 6 perceptive sensory fields that produce the perceptive I, that relationship. The intellectual capacity of list making, which is the input of each sense about every single situation, the psychological timbre, the emotional tone, the subtle levels of intent that are the deep substructure of identity. All is stored perfectly in memory and stored as sanskaric data. But it's important to understand with each incarnation, all of this is input, this is production. So after countless lives, we have an enormous amount of data of raw karmic cause and effect and conditional samskaric input. Because we have samskaric input, which is of the nature of ignorance, it's false identity, the belief in the egocentric I, and all of the product of the dynamics of ignorance, desire. Our attachment to the wheel is absolute, and we are driven to incarnate, to play out this content. It's an important subtlety to understand that not every incarnation, because each lifetime is driven by your karma and cause and effect. You must incarnate. You'll be in various settings, but it'll be mitigated by the content of your condition, the samskara content, which will condition your reality. Therefore, if one has gained knowledge of the path and begin to systematically uplift one's modus operandi, beginning to act in love, generosity, kindness, patience, forbearance. The quality of one's conditioning karma upgrades, and as that occurs, the quality of one's existence upgrades. In other words, there's more open because there are lighter systems of being. And that's when one becomes more open and has, it's a kind of, it's not really a rewards punishment system, because it's actually a weights and balances almost. But you're up and down. But what's important to understand is that you don't manifest your entire storehouse of samskaras every single lifetime. By this time, you've got samskaras from so many lives. And as you come through the membrane out of the bardo, and what is the bardo but that field of mind and the fibers and lines of the world that goes on into eternity, and is in a matrix here at 13 to 25. Just like a genetic feed, the genome, various aspects of your genetic compound will come forward and become dominant, and some will be recessive. Samskaras do the same thing. Sometimes you'll have some set of samskaras that will match up with a certain timing of a given incarnation. And what we'll actually see is that people incarnate in sets. Like you'll incarnate as a certain kind of person or kind of being for several lifetimes, because it is so circumspect and so complicated that it'll have an arc to it, and it'll push you through different kinds of fields of existence. And different sets of samskaras will come forward, and others will go into recess, and they'll trade places many times. It's actually when you start to get the repetition, because it's by repetition we gain recognition, because the mind recognizes movement. That's what it sees. And when you start to get same set kinds of incarnations enough times, a bell goes off and you gain recognition. And you start turning the wheel of recognition towards yourself and beginning to bring in the higher angels of love, offsetting fear, gaining access to the belief in the existence of a way out. Even if you don't know it, consciously you know it unconsciously, and you'll start to assert yourself, and as you assert that, your behavior will subtly change.